Thank you. So let us continue. Well, talking about China, Miguel, if you want to stay, as well as Gabby, because we're going to keep talking about China. It is a priority in the world. In the midst of this dilemma in the world, like between the U.S. doesn't want to be the leader and China do want it. So the question is, since this happened very quickly, is is China ready for this hegemonic competition and cut the cake around the world and assure the security of the world? Is China ready? And other powers like China internationally and the policies being followed so to feel the influence of China in international matters and the advances they have to achieve world leadership that is not seen far but rather immediate. Who is going to talk about it? Yes, thank you very much. Yes, Mauricio. We have Professor Dr. Connelly. She's a researcher of Colegio de Mexico, Center of Studies of Asia, Africa, Area China since 1985, specialist in foreign policy, history of China, problems of environment in China. She has lectured in higher education school like University Anáhuac, University del Sur, and she's the coordinator of the annual document Asia Pacific 2018, author of the chapter of China in Colegio de Mexico 2019. Mexico and Kuomintang, two revolutionary strategy and their results, among others. So let us give the floor to Dr. Marisela Connelly, who will present Is China ready to become the hegemonic power? Welcome. We're all ears. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure being here with you. I'm very happy to be again with you in this annual meeting, and I will share with you my progress being made in my research and also share with you especially that this situation have allowed China to make progress and the position China has internationally. As you know, China is a very big country. It is a country that has differences equally important depending on the place we look China from. And this is where this modernization process happened. And then with the new policies promoted to go to the Western Hemisphere, they have been put in practice there. How China has managed to achieve the place it has nowadays. So we need to discuss about this economic reform process that China began in 1978. Those economic reforms allowed China to become a high growth country. We saw how in all these 40 years of economic reform, the growth was 9.5%. So that allowed China to double the GDP every 8 years, to get 800 millions out of poverty. And as China economy matured, the growth of the GDP dropped from 14.2% to 6.6%. 32% of the GDP was generated by state-owned companies, but the economic reform was based in the household savings, the corporation savings, and productivity, and that was really essential to the progress of the economic reforms. So what will happen? What will happen is that China will continue with the progress of the economic reform in several aspects. In agriculture, when the family responsibility system was implemented and material incentives were given, the rural enterprises were constituted. And this is very important because we're going to have a boom of agriculture since 79 and part of the 80s. And then because of the reform and the emphasis put by the government, the agriculture would have a slow. And then the opening, how this industry will grow and it will have an important position in the economy. The openness is one of the essential elements with the establishment of the special economic zones where the direct foreign investment gets. We have private companies, and the development of the foreign trade that little by little is renewed when it comes to institutional system and to make it more fluent, so to become in a very important engine of the economy. So what we are looking in this first decades of the economic reform, it is a combination of a plan with a market, because we are not passing from a planned plan to a market plan. This is going to be a gradual growth. So they take into account if they are effective and if they are really giving results. If not, they are eliminated, and then they will try with another companies to see if this progress is feasible. So we see how exports to abroad and the direct investment, foreign investment in China will be two important engines of this reform. Why? Because the direct foreign investment in China in those special economic zones have new technology, new production processes that little by little will be examined and adopted by the Chinese authorities. On the decade of the 80s, it was a little bit difficult because these reforms are gradual reforms, and between the official groups that still defend the planned plan, like Chen Zhong, who during the 50s he put a plan based on the Soviet Union, and on the other hand, Deng Xiaoping that says, no, we have to make progress in the reforms. We need to keep opening the economy regardless of the problems we're facing. And one of the problems in the 80s is precisely the inflation. That for the Communist Party in China, this was terrible because it reminded it the years of the 40s when the Nationalist Party was the one ruling China. And because of the problems created during that period, the inflation was really high, and this contributed to the fall of the National Party. So that is why the Communist Party is paying attention to everything that is related to inflation. In the 90s, those reforms are in another stage where it is important to consider the institutional reform to establish a regulatory framework aimed at the market. All of this will be happening in the organs of the Chinese Communist Party and in the third period. In December of 1993, the National Popular Assembly, which is the legislative body of China, approved the law of companies along with important reforms that were needed to mitigate the institutional system and make it like more coincident with the reality of China. Okay, there were two exchange rates, one internal and the other for operations, the labor law, and at the same time they were protecting the rights of workers, but also to have the specific rules concerning the duties of workers. So here we'll see how the state-owned companies reform, because the state-owned companies were a burden for the system because they were asking for loans to the banks that were state-owned, but at the end they didn't pay. So they needed to have a restructuration and those companies be more efficient. This is during the decade of the 90s when we started following this policy since 1997, where all the small companies were sold, and the mid-sized companies also, if they were able to restructurate, they could stay. If not, they would go. And then all the big state-owned companies that little by little became in share companies where the managers will have a very important role. But the state also continues supervising and how this new system is being developed when it comes to state-owned big companies. During the 1995, we see how the expenditure of state companies and local governments was limited. And the local governments, with that reform, they started to have loans. They started making transactions with foreign companies. And the state-owned government started to have more debts, and the revenues of the states were concentrated, so the central government didn't receive as much proceeds. So they began to establish clear rules and what they would be keeping when it comes to the local governments. And after the first boom in agriculture, then again we will have a stagnation. That is why they pay attention again to agriculture during the 90s. The state investment was increased, the grain production was increased because this was basic for the Chinese, also to have the grain production that would guarantee that that the population will be always nourished. Then in 1993, the grain price was no longer controlled by the state, and in 96, the flow of migrants from the field to the city. In China, there's a system that is known as Gobo. It's a system in which each person has its own registration in the place where he or she was born or he or she was lived. So that's why this person is allowed to have all the services given by the state, to have education, work. So if a person goes to live to another place, it would lose all these benefits. And this will happen with this group of migrants that go to the city. And they know perfectly that in the city, they won't have all the social services they used to have in their place of origin. But they will have works that will be better paid, and this will allow them to send money to their families at their points of origin. So this group will be increasing little by little. But during 97, again, we will see a stagnation of productivity and growth of the rural revenue. And this is one of the reasons by which we will have this migration. Okay, so let's talk about the 21st century when the Jintao, the secretary of the Communist Party, is ruling. So he realizes that not only we need to have economic growth that is stable, but we also need that growth would be more and more reflected in the pockets of the Chinese population. And this is very important because the Communist Party needs to have the support of the population, because it is afraid that at some point the population will not be satisfied with his performance and may cause outrages or problems. So let's have a scientific growth, he said, a balanced growth in such a way that we can satisfy the needs of the population. So during that period of 10 years, the first 3 years of the 21st century, we will see on one hand the foreign trade law was amended, and then in the year 4 we will see a commercial dynamism, and also we will have more foreign investment, because China is still a country that attracts a lot of foreign companies. It is still very competitive when it comes to attract foreign investment. So China becomes the axis of the trade in Asia, because China realizes that based on the 90s, that countries of the Southeast in Asia started to see it as a competitor. Why? Because China is producing products that they are producing. So there's a competition in their market and also in the markets of other countries, of third parties or countries. So what China did in 97 is to support those countries, because all the countries of Asia were very affected by the crisis. So they were really thankful. And then China would propose them, the Jintao, to have a production chain. So China will be the center, and they will be revolving around China. So everybody will win in this net of production, and little by little China will be becoming in the axis of the Asian trade dynamism. So also we will see how the private sector in China it's made more visible, because more than 50% of what is consumed in China, of what it's sent to like abroad, is produced by the private sector. And this is good because the private companies in China haven't had the support that the state companies has had, because the state companies had always received loans from the state banks, and the private sector had to go to other sources to have financing. And with all of these barriers, they would have managed to move forward and become, as I said before, an axis. And then in 2005, it's because the U.S. is telling China that has to revaluate its currency, because they think that is why they're so competitive when it comes to the Chinese exports. And at the end, we will see how China accepts in 2005 to revaluate the renminbi.
It was in this period when in the United States we started to see this growth that China started to have and has become a country that didn't have an international presence to an international stakeholder. This country has benefited from the international system established from the Second World War. So China has to assume its international role. And that's how they started to undertake these measures, so they are not seen only as a country which is not taking advantage of what the international system offers to them. In this first decade of the 21st century, we will see how they also focused in the rural region. In 2008, they decided to have development in modern agriculture. They were going to abolish the agricultural tax and also the change for the use of land. In the past, this right cannot be changed from one family to another or one person to another. Supposedly, in the countryside, it is collective property. So they released this use of land, so they started to have growth. You can buy land, you can extend your property and increase your crops. In some areas, they are more specialized, increasingly. What are we going to see? For 2012, we see an important leadership role change when the power is given to Xi Jinping. He's a leader who was raised in the area of Marxism-Leninism. He was always committed with the Chinese Communist Party, a leader that has always thought about the Communist Party, which cannot stop existing in China as it happened in Western Europe or Russia. Since he took the power, he will have very clear goals. he will start undertaking measures since the beginning. The model of exports foreign investment in China is worn. It is necessary to adopt a new growth model. This model should be based on internal consumption and the service sector. China has developed a robust middle class. There are about 400 million inhabitants in this class, and this class goes beyond the needs, basic needs. This middle class think about buying different goods, services, having their own home, etc. So this model, which is based on internal consumption and services, will allow to transform the Chinese economy. Little by little, they will also focus on developing high technology, green energies. In this way, they will also advance in other sectors. For 2020, which is our current year, state companies will also respond to the country's social needs with this restructuring of these companies to make them more competitive. Since Jintao, this policy to the outside started. Chinese companies start investing in other countries to attain experience, to become more competitive, and make their brands known at international level. Computers, electronics, etc. This year, they expect to comply with this goal and devote a percentage of their income to do that. Of course, they didn't take into consideration the sanitary crisis that we're experiencing. We are seeing how local governments assume their responsibility. Local governments, in spite of all the work since the 90s, continue with this trend of wanting to have their own investment agreements, their own projects. So there's a need to adjust themselves to national policies. On the other hand, the need to carry out a radical reform so the government has more income and people pay more income tax, and the companies also pay more, so they can undertake this reform for social security. Another point that Xi Jinping has stressed out is urbanization. China has undertaken a very important urbanization process. They have established goals for all these years in this decade. And yes, we see more small and medium-sized cities where they were rural zones. They are now practically connected with big cities. This has been very important. And this is also linked to the development of communications in China. Now we can see fast trains, a very efficient railroad network, an exceptional network of highways. When I visited China in 1979, there was a railway from Guangdong to Shanghai. This railway was old, with wooden seats, rustic. And now you get into one of these high-speed trains that are so accurate. And you see how China has advanced in all these decades. This chart shows the GDP growth of China from 1979 to 2017. As you may appreciate, it's impressive, its growth. Of course, it has had peaks and valleys due to the issues that the country has faced, both internal and external, but they have kept a good growth. We can see that in the last years it decreases because it came to its limit. The economy has matured, and also the GDP per capita has advanced a lot. We are seeing here how in the last years it has grown a lot. In 2018, you can see this in the chart. The nominal growth was 9,608. That it's equivalent to the per capita. If we take into account the purchase power, it's higher than in the economy of China, and we can see how the prices of goods and services is half of the United States. Taking into consideration this purchase power rate, we see that China overcame that of the United States. From the nominal point of view, not yet. Now, talking about per capita income, there's still a way to go to become a high-income country. According to the data of the World Bank, China went from a low-income country to a mid-income country in 1997. In 2010, it became a mid-high income country. As we saw in the chart of 2017, per capita GDP is 8,690, which is 38.7%, to become a high-income economy. We are seeing here China GDP and the United States as part of the total global in percentage and based in purchase power prices. We can see how China is increasing while United States is decreasing. Now, talking about manufacturing, we can see manufacturing production in 3 countries: China, United States, and Japan. We can see how China still has an outstanding performance. These are 2016 figures, and we can see how they have surpassed both the United States and Japan. Now, turning to wages. This is a problem that China has because labor has become more expensive. This has led China to be not as competitive as it was in previous decades. For example, in 1990, in the United States, there was a wage for $55 a month, Vietnam 32, China 21. In 2018, in China is 990 US dollars a month, Vietnam $238 per month, and Mexico $383 per month. This means that China labor has increased its price. All this is related to all these demographic process that it's been experienced in China. Now, talking about investment in China, both foreign and domestic investment in China. Foreign direct investment in 2018 was $239 million. It is the second world receptor after the United States. Now, talking about investment, we can see how it grows so fast since 2005, and it's going to exceed internal investment for the first time in this year, 2017. This is important and is related to China's policy to strengthen state companies so they have good performance abroad, so they can start buying companies in other countries to acquire new technology, experience in management. And we are seeing how from this big foreign investment of China abroad starts decreasing. This is due to restrictions of other governments. Why? As we will see, especially in the United States and Europe, they start to see China as a serious competitor. The European Union calls it a strategic competitor, and United States starts to attack China, especially during the Trump administration. So, more restrictions and obstacles are placed on China's companies to invest abroad. So they have more restrictions to buy companies abroad. This is going to be a very important obstacle. Now, China's trade. We can see in this chart how there have been different levels. In the last years, we are seeing a growth in exports and also imports. Especially what we're going to see in spite of placing stress in this model, foreign trade still plays a very important role in the Chinese economy. As we said before, China is facing great challenges at global level. Restrictions and obstacles placed by the United States and Europe have made the Chinese government to reflect, to see how they can make the necessary changes So they are not considered as a threat. For example, from Germany, Angela Merkel has said that as China has grown a lot, they are at a level that they need to understand that they should also give priority to their relationship with other countries. So they also allow them to enter their market. Angela Merkel says China has to open its market to European products. They need to show that they are truly a partner in whom we can trust, and they are not only looking to take advantage of European Union countries, but they are also trying to establish a more egalitarian relationship. We will talk about this in detail later on, but in all these years, China has attained an urbanization impressive process. We're talking about 60.6%. They have 34 metropolitan areas that constitute 59% of the total population and 77.87% of the GDP. 400 million inhabitants in the middle class, more than 170 million of qualified professionals. We can also see how companies are positioning themselves. If we see the Fortune list in 2016, we can see how in their biggest companies, 103 Chinese companies are included, compared to 20 that they had in 2006. Most of these companies, interestingly, are companies where the government has an important participation. We can see how these companies generate very important income. In addition, they employ 16.2 million workers. Figures from 2016. We can also see how the banking system that had to subject to the World Trade Organization rules to be part of this organization start to get modernized, and they start to adapt the administration way of foreign banks, but they are still controlled by the state, and they are controlled by members of the state. We can see that foreign participation is reduced 1.6% in the banking system. And we can see, and this is another critic of foreign governments, since 2013, Xi Jinping implemented this practice of the strip and route. This infrastructure process tries to take China to different places in Asia, Africa, then Europe, Latin America, Pacific Islands, and this is done by brokers. So China has its project to use their technology, their standards to build this connectivity axis, these economic corridors in different countries in these areas. during this project, we can see how China becomes the core of these projects, and countries are subject to funding of China by means of this bank that was also created through this initiative. This is the Infrastructure Development Bank. They have been highly criticized because they say that this has contributed to the debt of countries, so this can leave China managing their projects. So maybe it is not convenient for these countries. But the Chinese government has stressed out that they want to have communication development with these countries that allows for these flows, trade, exchange, investment, etc. Lately, we have seen, especially by means of the Trump administration, a lot of criticism. He says that he's opportunistic, he's taking advantage of a Second World War system to take advantage of it, to become in an economic power. So, attacks have started. You have seen them in the international newspapers, how this trade war between China and the United States is started. They are placing restriction. So what we're seeing is that these countries, especially the United States, want to stop the advance of China. They try that China doesn't become a power and surpasses their place and then forms a new international system following the rules that they establish. We have seen how Chinese have spoken about an international system based on the Chinese model, with peace and stability. A very different model to the one that we have, where we have a predominance of instability and wars. And with this sanitary crisis, we do not know where this world is leading to. And a lot has been said about the military advance in China. They say that they spend a lot in the modernization of their army, of everything they need for their army. And in addition to that, their army has a very strict discipline, well organized, and they are projecting an image of discipline. So they believe that this army is going to be used by China to achieve world predominance. So we see how this confrontation between China and the United States takes place. China is saying that some islands are theirs, and all this fight in which the United States is in the middle. They're sending different armies, and they have criticized a lot of the advancement. And we also have the situation of the islands that are the dispute between China and Japan. There's a critical situation here. All this is in this practice of the corridor and the strip.
So he has like different numbers. In China, it is how much is a military expense, and if we see how much the military expense growth, if there were 19 billion American dollars for 2016, were 200 and something. So what we are seeing right now is that the United States, it is still very superior in the military aspect with respect to China, and China knows it. That is why China has been very careful, very careful when when dealing with the so aggressive American government, because we have seen how Trump has made criticism without even thinking in the language he uses. We have seen Pompeo with the discourse, the speech he gave when he said, we need to stop China. We cannot afford to let China continue to grow, and how they are meddling with internal affairs in China. They were celebrating of the movement of 4th of May of 1919, which was a very important movement in China, advocating the rights of Chinese towards the powers, and said that China must have to be like more in the right, and this message was directed to the Chinese. That's why Pompeo talked in Chinese. So the U.S. is really afraid of the progress of China, because it knows that when China wants to achieve something, works tirelessly to achieve that goal. And when we analyzed all the speeches delivered by the leaders of the Communist Party in China, we see that this is the trend. We need to keep modernizing ourselves. This is what they said. We need to find our new place in the world. We need to put aside the system that prevailed for so many decades and starting to establish a system that is like more to par with the Chinese system. The Secretary General of the Communist Party in his speech said that China is preparing to take the lead. It won't happen overnight, but they know what the constraints are. But they are thinking about making progress in all the goals they have set, and all the barriers that they see, or the barriers put by the developed countries, how they are, the markets are limited by the investment of companies. They are also limiting them. The purchase of technology, the U.S. prohibited to sell technology, American technology, to the companies that use it. So China, as they said, will steal all the progress made during the last few decades. So this is an antagonism we're facing, led by the U.S. And yes, they are afraid of the progress of China, and they are afraid of where the Chinese government can reach. So the Chinese leaders have patience. Before they act, they analyze the situation involved. If they see this is a situation that is not good for them, so they try to be patient. When they see that they are attacked aggressively, they start to reply. And this happened when the U.S. started approaching to Taiwan Island, and the government of the Taiwan Island, which is a government that is opposed to the unification of China. This was the party whose president is Taiping won, and the island tried to approach the government of the U.S., and in turn, the government of the U.S. has responded. They have sent high officials to the island, and they have all welcomed all their democratization process. And this is a very sensitive situation, because the U.S. again is meddling in the problem in the Taiwan Strait. This is a historical problem from 1949, when the Communist Party in China won the civil war with the Nationalist Party, and the Nationalist Party refugied themselves in the island of Taiwan. And so the U.S. has always been in the middle. And now, after years, the academic in the U.S. Would say that there's no point that the U.S. Interferes in the problem of Taiwan, and the economy of Taiwan is very linked to the economy in China, and China will be assimilated more and more. When the Nationalist Party until 26, and it rolled from 28 to 2016, the president made a truce, so China wasn't fighting anymore for diplomatic allies, and just to foster to have a more unionized or economies. So the dialogue was end with the new president, and China is suspecting to see what happens. But the re-election of Taiwan, Mrs. Taiwan in January 2020, as I said, the U.S. approached much more the Taiwan island. He's had a very important performance in the sanitary measures when she managed to eradicate the pandemic in the island and help other countries trying to mitigate the consequences of the virus. So this is a very sensitive situation. As I said before, for China, it is a national goal. It is a matter of sovereignty and recovering the Taiwan. Since the 90s, Deng Xiaoping at that time said we cannot wait more to recover Taiwan, because time is going by and generations that knew all the historical process are dying, and the youngs that are getting older do not know all the situation, so they don't want to feel attached to the continent because they haven't lived in it. And he was so right when he said that, because what we see is that the youngsters are the ones reluctant to have this unification process with China. This can lead to a war, because China does not accept that third parties interfere in matters of sovereignty. So this is it. I just want to give you my conclusions, and I would answer some questions if you like. As conclusions, what we can draw as conclusions. First and foremost, China will not become the superpower overnight. China has a long way to go to become a hegemonic power, but it's moving ahead, even though it has barriers imposed by the U.S., but China is betting to technology and research. Now that they have had so many problems because of the barriers to continue absorbing the technology of their companies. So one of the goals is to become self-sufficient in research and technology, to try to understand the technology of the U.S. and allies. But as I said, this is not an easy task. It requires a process. They are working on that, and they realize they cannot still be so dependent of the U.S. technology. That's why some analysts say what the U.S. is doing is that China will foster even more its development in research. It is creating many centers of research, and also tries to bring Chinese researchers that have studied abroad in order to have their own technology. And right now they have made very important progress. I don't doubt that in a few years they will attain the goal of having their own technology. Right now they have the winds against it. All the telephony system is very affected by the restrictions imposed by the U.S. All those agreements with European countries to establish their 5G networks all fell down. Mexico convinced those countries that to not use Huawei because they say that they would steal their military secrets. And those countries like Great Britain, for example, decided not to accept Huawei establish the 5G. China sets goals and always want to attain by hard work. All against, they have the decreasing of the active economic population. We see how the Chinese population is getting older, and this is due precisely because of the one-child policy since 1979, because to try to control the births, and that was an obstacle of the economic development. But what we see is that the Chinese population is getting older, and we are seeing the lack of labor, and this is very important in this process that we have been analyzing today. What is China going to do with this elderly population? They will have to set a social network to support them, because all those times when the children took care of the parents have disappeared. It is not that easy like before, like children taking care of their own parents. So to end, the international adverse environment faced by China, and we don't know if it will continue this way. In November, the elections in the U.S. will be very important, not if Biden wins. it would follow a more amiable policy with China. The Democrats also have been talking about the progress of China, that China is a threat, but it's not going to be like a very conciliating policy if Biden wins, but probably would not be so belligerent like the one followed by the President Donald Trump. So this is it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions. Thank you, Doctor. We do have one question. 2 minutes to answer. Yes, if you can. What's been the growth engine of the economy? Well, we said that precisely in the model that was fall behind, that fell behind was increase of productivity by using internal domestic savings in a productive way, and also be able to attain efficiency. So these are the most important elements to try to reach efficiency. So as I said before, this is not only an achievement of the state-owned companies. The business private sector has played a very important role for this model be successful. Now with the new model that was established since 2013, they keep working since what they call this dual system, in which the export investment will be also important, but also putting emphasis on the domestic saving and the service sector development. Thank you very much, Doctor. Your presentation has been really important. We have another comment that reads that your talk has been really interesting, and we're going to ask Miliana Ortiz to give Doctora Marisela Connelly her diploma. Please, Mrs. Ortiz, we will show on the screen your diploma. Good afternoon. We would like to thank Dr. Marisela Connelly on behalf of UC&CS America for sharing her knowledge with us in this 25th anniversary, and for her valuable participation as a speaker in the Technical Conferences Cycles 2020 under the subject, Is China Ready to Become an Hegemonic Power? Thank you very much, Doctor. No, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much, as always. You've been the key to enter the great institution like Colegio de Mexico, and we are very glad because they're open its doors in the conferences we have. It's a pleasure to be every year with you, your annual meeting, and honestly, I hope that next year will be in person. Yes, hopefully that will be the case.